Kia ora rā, te whānau nau mai hoki mai ki tēnei kaupapa or planting seeds, but I was going to say te ara hau there. Just coming
same.
just same actually. But welcome back to the podcast, e te whānau. It's been a while since coming on and having a bit of a jam, and our next guest, the person that we're bringing on, is someone that we've been trying to get this happening for a little while now, but Matariki has aligned for us in order for us to be here today. So e hoa, Kiri, nau mai.
Tēnā koe e hoa. It has been a while. Very honoured, bro. Very honoured, bro, to be asked to be part of this, share this space with you.
Man, it's been such a long time, and I think with all of the things that have been happening in our personal lives, I suppose it's helped us to bring more kōrero to what this wānanga is going to be. if we have any left after the kōrero that we've been having already. But what's been happening? You've been doing a lot of mahi recently, and how is everything in your mahi space going?
Yeah, we've all been doing a lot, I think. I look around and I see, your beautiful mahi, and I can see so many of us working so hard in spaces of trying to help heal our people in different ways, and helping our people unpack their traumas and all those sorts of things, and just really seeing our people shine so much and helping empower each other. I've seen it across so many spaces, and in your space and across social media. I can see it in our music industry. Our Māori musos are really pumping for us at the moment and empowering our rangatahi and our whānau. We've got our in politics, our Māori whānau are going for it. In different areas, whānau ora, our kura kaupapa, I can just see such a massive rise of being unapologetically Māori and unapologetic about our need and our want to empower one another, to hiki one another. So that's sort of, in a nutshell, some of the things I've been up to lately, just doing. I don't like to have one job. I get bored. When people ask me what I do, I'm sort of like, have you got 10 minutes to help me break that down for you? But doing all sorts of bits and pieces, bro. Been working heaps in whānau ora, in the whānau ora space. Last month I was fortunate enough and really privileged to have been able to be the architect of what we call Te Kawa o Whānau Ora, which is almost an ecosystem for best practice across all of our whānau ora organisations and kaiarahi, and that came from the need for me as my background is in clinical psychology. I understood very early on in the piece when I was training as a clinical psychologist that it didn't ever feel right with me in my indigenous wairua. It never ever sat okay with me. So when I came out of university, and I was told right throughout the process, bro, trust the process, get the tohu. And when you get the tohu, you do whatever you want. And so as a practicing psychologist for about 7 years, I just thought, this doesn't feel right with me, all of the mahi that I'm doing, and I want to set out to find why. Why is it that I'm not feeling okay about being a psychologist? And I would feel embarrassed to say to our people that I was a psychologist, because it comes with so many negative connotations. The clinical word scares our whānau. So I actually went out and did a whole lot of research. I can be a bit of a nerd like that, because I wanted to understand what it was that I felt so disconnected from in terms of that space, and I didn't really have the language to do it. All I knew was that it didn't feel right to my indigenous bones, but I wanted to find the language to be able to articulate that a little bit better. And I managed to find a massive body of research out there, actually, that talked about all of the work in helping professions, therapeutic success. 80% of that has actually got to do with the person that walks in the door. And that's got to do with their internal resource. The internal resource is their resilience, how pakari they are, their emotional intelligence, their belief that they can make a change, their motivation to make change, their hope, as well as their external resources, so their community networks, whānau, how well connected they are outside of. So that's 80%, so nothing to do with the helper. And I also learned that 15% of therapeutic success, outside of that 80%, has got to do with what psychology calls a therapeutic alliance. To us, that's whanaungatanga. That's our ability to make connections, meaningful connections. It's in our DNA. So I learned, and I felt really liberated and angry all in the same way, because I learned that actually 95% of any therapeutic success has got to do with being Māori. And that's where whānau ora is. And 5%, has got to do with models. 5% of therapeutic success has got to do with models. So the liberation part came from, I lived constantly in a cognitive dissonance, right? And that's when kei te taupatupatu te mahunga ki tō puku. So where your behaviours and your thoughts aren't aligning with your values. I lived that constantly for a really, really long time, and it takes a toll. And so the liberating part of that was, this is why I don't feel okay. It's because this 95%, it's never been validated in any of my work, and it's never been validated with any of our people. And the 5%, why I got wild was because I spent 100% of my time at university learning about 5% of what makes a difference for our people. And that's when I set out to really invest all my time into that 95%. And at the moment I see one vehicle for me is whānau ora. And so I really wanted to invest in spending time building what that 95% looks like, setting up that pātu wata for everyone in that whānau ora space, one, to validate what they do as Māori, and to know that we intervene in whānau ora in the most meaningful ways, 95%. Of the most meaningful ways for our whānau, and that we can't expect for others to value that until we do. And so I do a lot of work with kaiarahi, whānau ora practitioners. Te kaua whānau ora was set up as an ecosystem to ensure that we are all aligning to and being accountable to the same values that bring about the 95% of that therapeutic success.
So when you say the 95%, is that just in being Māori, or is it just connection to Māori? Like how do you break down that 95%?
It's all of the above, bro? So one of the things that you and I have been doing prior to this is building connections, relationships. One of the things that whānau ora does in terms of that 95% is a lot of it's got to do with ngākau Māori and just the way we engage with one another. It's got to do with the fact that when we're stepping foot and working with our people, it's not a job. It's a responsibility that we have, and that when someone comes in my door for awhi, they become mine, right? And so there's another aroha and another level of investment that you put into that. That's a therapeutic alliance, is where you have, and in the psychology world, in the world of mental health, that is governed by psychiatry and psychology. There's no room for talk of aroha, and there's no room for the things that we can't see, but only the things that we can feel. And that's what actually makes the difference. And the other part of that is, we're not born in this world to be alone.
That's right.
And whānau ora is about, if you're coming in, so people that seek professional support, most people deal with those on their own. There are about 20% of people that seek external support, and that's often because there is a breakdown in connections outside. There's a disconnection to whakapapa, there's a disconnection to whānau, disconnection to a lot of external spaces, and also because they're exhausted and worn down inside. So that's the 80% of our whānau. When they're ready, when they come into us, we wrap around them in every sense of the word. We help, we put them in the driver's seat. And one of the things that whanaura does more so is it really, I also see it as an active decolonising tool, because what it does is it really helps our whānau to dream again. Through colonisation, our ability to dream was taken away from us. Right. And so this is about putting our whānau back in the driver's seat, even though they all don't want to drive. And just saying, hey, I'm here. I'm in this journey with you right the whole way until you tell me that I can get out of the car.
I really like that. I really, something that I've just been processing about that's given me a lot of encouragement is around, even you said the 95% is around being Māori, but there's that 80% of I guess practitioners' work is already it relies on that 80% of what the individual has already. So that comes down to, I guess, the layers. I suppose in facilitation and spaces that I've been in is that understanding that they do have it within them. Yeah. But I guess the role that facilitators have or practitioners have is to help take off the layers so that they can access that 80% to come into that space of healing. And something that you said to me off camera was there's a difference between treatment and healing. And can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I think that's koina te tino rere ketanga. That's a big difference I see between Western models of mental health and what we need to be clear about, that in this country we are driven by a mental health system that the whakapapa of that mental health system comes from the UK and from America, and the cream of the crop of that mental health system psychiatrists, katahi ka heke ki ngā psychologists, and down and down and down we go. Whanau practitioners are right at the bottom. And without a whanau practitioner, no psychiatrist can even get in the door. But what we're dealing with from a Western psychological perspective is there's a man, that I'm going to forget his name, who has coined the term the killer Ds. So it's focused on dysfunction, disorder, disease, and a couple of others, diagnosis. And when you're looking at a philosophy that comes from that, you also have a profession who believes that they are the ones who are going to do the fixing. And that's the treatment that I'm talking about. When they come in, when they talk about what we're going to do, what's the treatment mode we're going to use? And that's when you really dig down below the philosophy of where that kōrero comes from. It comes from a place of superiority, that I can do this to fix you. Whereas whanaura, everything that you're doing, bro, what we're trying to do in our space, which is inherently Māori, is helping people understand that the answers lie with them, the solutions lie with them, and that's where healing happens. So healing happens from the inside out. And one of the things that we're really good at doing is, in whanaura and all those spaces, and helping our whānau realise their potential. And also empowerment can be... there's arguments for the term empowerment too, and where that kōrero comes from. But I think roles like you and I have are really important in helping people facilitate alongside our whānau to aki and being cheerleaders all the time. And sometimes when they veer off the road, when you're getting a little bit lost on our nav, man, we're there to say, hey, there's another pathway here. There's another pathway here to get you to that point. And that's really where the healing comes from, is understanding that ko tō oranga ka puta i a koe. But also because of we have there's a divinity about us, ko heke mai tātou, i o tātou matua tīpuna. We didn't just come here and get here by accident. It was by design. And we have got a legacy of people who drew on everything about their taiao and their environment to get through. And that's the healing, that we're trying to bring in and support our people with.
Wow. I love all of that, Ewa. And I think about an experience about had an interaction with someone quite recently, and it was about an hour-long conversation, and this person has been going to therapy, for weeks and weeks, and in that one session he said he had got so much more out of that one kōrero prior to all of the sessions that he had been in, because of the genuineness within the kōrero, because of him arriving to particular answers on his own, or him being able to feel into the moment, rather than, I guess, being in that therapy space and being told certain things, or perhaps not feeling safe enough to bring out certain kōrero that could have helped them in those spaces. And so when you think about what it is that you shared around just creating space and helping them guide their own process, the thing that I think about when it comes to people who are perhaps going through certain things, treatment seems so much easier than healing. And so how would you break that down? How would you break down the thoughts that people have around how hard it would be to go down the healing route, and why it's easier to go down the treatment route?
Oh, that's a big one. I think healing means being naked in front of a lot of people. And I think there are a few things that we need to combat in that. And I think there is a dominant narrative out there at the moment that we're only hearing about counselling and psychology and mental health and anxiety and all these things. And when you look at the whakapapa of those titles, those labels, the only solution that we also see is counselling and therapy and doing all those things. So I think part of the reason is that the media hype, what we see is that our people actually only see that there's one way. Wow. And it's this particular way. And I think a lot of that comes down to also our disconnection from our Māoritanga. And because there's been such a dominant narrative around how much psychology and counselling and all these things make all the difference, there's not the same level of importance, I suppose, put around mātauranga Māori and everything that we do as Māori. And so I think there's just an imbalance generally in the way people view the difference. And I write down to me having a doctorate, so I can walk into spaces and some Māori do not want to hear from anybody that is not a doctor. They want to see somebody that has gone through a university system. And then we have a lot of whānau who actually are completely put off by the doctorate. But that says a lot to do about the dominant narrative, what we've been conditioned to believe in as being appropriate solutions. Now, the side of healing is very different, and it's very different because there's a level of vulnerability that's required. So in therapy and treatment, it's just you going in, and you're talking to a complete stranger. So you can also fib if you want and tell some lies about, really what's going on. And you can also be really truthful about it, but there's no accountability back to the people that you're actually serving. So I think what healing does is it really opens a can of worms. And it does that because in a Māori, we are responsible to a people. We're responsible to our whānau, our hapu, our iwi, te iwi Māori. There are a lot of layers and obligations that come in as being Māori, and I think healing is a very very scary space for our whānau to be in, because we have undergone some massive, massive trauma. So there's a lot of mamai, there's a lot of hurt. And
it's not just your own, eh?
I think our people, rightly so, are very, very fearful of allowing the can of worms to open, because for a lot of us it's taken a lifetime to suppress all of that. So I think the healing is stepping into the most uncomfortable spaces you've ever been into. And I don't think necessarily there are enough safe spaces for our people to step into that. Or even understanding what that looks like, you know, and awareness of what does actually healing mean for you in the long term, and are you ready? Are you ready for it too? Which is a different question again.
Yeah, I do understand all of that, and some of the kōrero that I've been sharing is healing is definitely a huarahi. And I think when we do start to process what healing looks like, we do think about the full can of worms. And that's the frightening thing. But I think perhaps a way that the process can start is, I do believe that it's not about opening up the full can, but there's something within your capacity now that you can manage. And I think that looking at just whatever you have the capacity for can help build the momentum and build the maturity and build the strength for the bigger things that perhaps need a bit more courage and a bit more confidence. And whether that's helping you get into the door, whether that's helping you get around other people, whether that's helping you get familiar with different language, because another conversation that we had was around the story that we tell ourselves. And before we get into that, I want to share a kōrero that I just personally went through, and I was through a breathwork session that was facilitated by a practitioner by the name of Ryan Bennett. He's actually someone who's helped me overcome asthma just through connecting with the breath. And I went through this breathworking session and it was called a rebirth.
Wow.
And I was breathing into my chest, and we were going through this whole process. I didn't lost track of time, wouldn't even know how long we were in it. But I didn't have any hara myself. And I knew in that moment that I was in this space and I was feeling really, really good. But I was like, if there's something that I could let go of, what could I let go of? And then this person came into my mind, and it's a whanau. And I felt all of their pain. It was their pain, and I just knew in that moment that it wasn't mine, and I just started wailing.
Wow.
I felt how painful it was, and I was rolling around and going through the rebirthing process, and I must have been feeling it for a little while, but I just knew that it just wasn't mine, and I wanted to feel it. I was like, I want to feel this pain, and it wasn't because I wanted to go through it, but it gave me the understanding that turned into compassion.
Wow.
It was through experiencing someone else's pain that I understood what it is that they may be carrying, that gave me a level of understanding and compassion, rather than feeling like, I want to fix you, I can't help you, because of, as you say, that big can of worms. And I think I felt, perhaps it wasn't all of it, but I felt a good grunt of it, and I could understand how scary it would be to open it up and to go through that process. Yeah. And so thinking about it in that way, compassion is is so huge for people who are either healers or practitioners, or people who have gone through a level of suffering. Knowing pain helps you build compassion, to be patient within these spaces, because you have to have patience. You have to allow people to go through. You have to be a good listener.
Yeah.
You have to perhaps not even have solutions sometimes. Perhaps it's just not even saying anything, but just being awkward in that silence is also very, very powerful. But going into the story aspect of it, like, how can we start to get more mindful around the stories that we tell ourselves? Because there is a pattern. Yep. We tell ourselves a story, we believe in them, it becomes part of our identity, and then boom, it creates the behaviors or the choices that we make.
Yeah. It's a really important concept, is, compassion. And when we're having compassion, really finding understanding, unpacking the whakapapa, everyone trying your hardest, and it's very difficult when you're in the heat of the moment with somebody that you're in conflict with, is to have compassion. And I think that starts with having an understanding and having some empathy, and those awkward silences, bro, are really necessary. And one of the things I used to get pulled up with as I was training to be a psych was that Kiri doesn't like awkward silences. So there would be a silence, and I'm like, I'm so, trying to have and it's because the awkwardness, any time you're feeling awkward, I'm I'm encouraging everybody that feels awkward to not do anything, to sit with the discomfort, to sit with the awkwardness. And I think, coming back to the story, the stories that we tell ourselves, we really need to understand, having compassion for ourselves is really understanding and breaking down the whakapapa of how our experiences growing up have shaped and conditioned who we are. We unconsciously, most of us are living unconsciously in our lives, right. And we're behaving in ways, and we don't know why we feel the way we do sometimes. I've spoken to so many people who say, this happened, and I don't know why. I don't know why I do this. I don't know why I do that. And it's really about unpacking the whakapapa of all of those things and bringing those things to an awareness. So we all have a story. Everything that we do, every behaviour, every decision that we make, every thought we have, every feeling we feel is connected back to something, and it can become really fun. Analysing why you do certain things. Everything has a story, and I shared with you before, bro. Just not long ago, I live 1.5 hours from the nearest town, and our washing machine was a little bit broken, and we had tons of washing. So I ended up with 6 huge bags of washing in the back of my car, and I took it to the laundromat in Rotorua, and I'm sitting there waiting for people to leave before I could take out my washing. And I'm observing this about myself, what I'm doing. I'm still not really unpacking why, but I'm thinking, what an idiot. I'm sitting here and I'm waiting for people to leave. And then I proceeded to go and rush in all these bags one by one so no one could see me. And then I did the same when I went back to pick it up the next day. And that's when I realised something was happening for me there. So I ran all the bags into the car, and it was funny because the lady at the shop, she goes, "How you go and grab this trolley?" And I was like, "Oh no, I'm not going to grab a trolley. That's worse." So I'm like, "No, thank you." And I'm just chucking them in the car, and I sat there for a little bit. I'm like, "What the hell was that about, Kiri?" So I literally talked to myself like this, like, "What the heck was that about? Why were you trying to rush in? What was the function behind that behaviour?" And then I realised that I was embarrassed. I felt embarrassed that I was carting all the 6 bags of washing in. And then I'm like, well, why are you embarrassed? What are you embarrassed about? Embarrassment comes from what others
see of you,
right? So I'm like, what is it that you're thinking people are going to say about you? And what came out for me was, and this is only a small example, and I'm like, okay, you're a lazy mum. If you can't look at all those 6 bags of washing, must mean that you're paru, you can't look after your home, you can't look after your whānau, all of these things. And I know, and then I also unpacked, well, where does that story actually come from? So that's the story, is you're lazy, you can't look after your home, you're a bad mum, you're a bad wife, you're focusing on your work, not doing any of these things. And I know that comes from a particular part of my whānau who are very critical, who are very judgmental, and I could also hear particular voices saying those things to me. And so this all happened within the span of 2 minutes while I'm unpacking all of this. But what it did was it allowed me to have compassion for myself, because through that time I'm actually punishing myself by running in with these bags, trying to pretend that I don't exist, and feeling embarrassed and feeling humiliated the shame behind all of that. And I'm just like, what the hell? So going through that process is really powerful, not in just small things but huge things as well, because one, you become kinder to yourself. And that was that for me, a Kiri. What the hell? Once I understood and could unpack that whakapapa of why I was feeling like that, then I'm like, okay, you're an idiot. You're a good mum. Your washing machine's broken. So you can respond back with a new story, right? With a story that is of that day and time, because often the stories that drive our behaviour from a 7-year-old voice.
Yeah.
Right? And it's the 10-year-old in us driving. And honestly, I am such a firm believer that until we start unpacking and understanding the whakapapa of our trauma, the 10-year-old in us is going to continue to make decisions on our behalf without really realising it.
And there's a lot of kōrero on inner child stuff at the moment too, and it's more so that inner child or that 10-year-old version of yourself is making those decisions because it just wants to be acknowledged.
Yeah.
You know, just wants to be acknowledged. And I really love the liberation that comes with going through analysing, I guess, where these certain behaviours come, because one, we can do a certain behaviour and we know it's not good for us sometimes, but we still do it. And we just go through the consequences of that bad decision. And for me, it's understanding cycles and looking at the patterns, because when I go through certain things because of bad decisions or some kinds of experiences are unfolding in my life, if it's happening and then I get through it, but then it happens again, I'm like, wow, what is this?
Yeah.
Where's this coming from? Because I don't like how I feel about this, or I don't like the certain things that happen because of a cycle that I'm unaware of. I'm just unaware of. And so going through that process, I start to whiri and I look at what it is, and I find the lessons, and I'm like, oh, that's why. Oh, because of this. And then that's where the healing comes through. So the hard thing is feeling the consequence, but the beauty is understanding why. And then for me, it's going through the learning process, the awakening, the awareness now has expanded, so I don't go through that process anymore, which means I don't feel that way. And I've grown to a space where that's become a part of my story, but it's also not the story I continue to tell myself now.
Nice. That's just as you're telling that story, I can just see each time there's less and less ego involved in it.
100%.
So the more we're aware of a certain pattern of ours, the awareness is a killer of ego. Right? When we're becoming more and more aware, and there is so much healing in that. And you're right. And it's actually a lot more safer than what people think. Analysing your own stuff, because it's only you. You know, all you got to do is just be so vulnerable with yourself and pick those things apart yourself. And I often, like in the beginning, really tried to look at it from the perspective of a scientist. You know, like, you know, you look at our babies, we're in a rush to do all these things, and they can hold up the works by just seeing a little stone on the ground and are just looking at it like they've never seen it before, right? And so I really try to look at my thoughts that way, that they're not me. They're not part of me. Our thoughts have been completely shaped by the environment, and it's not who I am. But when I look at it as something separate from me, I don't necessarily become so emotionally involved with them, and just try and look at them differently as a experiment. And I do in my mind, when I've experienced some sort of big emotion, whether it's happiness, sadness, or whatever, I just picture a child straight away looking at a rock and it's done differently, and I'm like, okay, then I want to do it with my thoughts.
That's cool. That's a mean exercise, because I think the trap is we think we are the thoughts. And the cycle that happens between, I guess, destructive thoughts is we start to feel emotions that make us feel very, very bad, you know. And that's what I noticed. I picked up a book when I first started the work, which was The Secret. And that book actually made me way more aware of the thoughts that I have and the relationship between thoughts and emotions. And if we're constantly having whakaaro that don't serve us and it makes us feel a certain way, but we want to be better, that's the disconnect. Is like we need to start to analyze and look at, I guess, our thoughts and emotions through the perspective of a baby looking at a stone, because we're separate from it. And I think, as you said, talking about ego, our ego is the mental image that we create of ourselves.
Yeah.
And it's the detachment from that and coming to our ngākau, coming to our puku. And that's very much so, as you were saying, how our tipuna were. We were very much present. We were very much in the moment. We weren't living in our minds based on what has happened in the past or an illusion that hasn't happened of our future. And so how can we create space through this connection of thoughts? Because through kōrero that I've read, we have over 10,000 thoughts a day. Yeah. And the trouble with that is that they're repeated thoughts. Yeah. What we think about today is what we thought about yesterday and what we thought about last week. So to change and to mold is we need new whakaro. We need new things. We need to be inspired. And the way we do that is by being present without thought to recreate, you know. So what are your whakaro around presence? Because you had whakaro about that, our tipuna, ego. Yeah,
I think, man, I think we over-identify with thoughts, full stop. And in terms of the mental imagery that we project as that ego, we also do that a hell of a lot with titles and labels and things. Like, we over-identify so much with a role or a title that we almost take on a different personality in all of these things. And when they are all just mental projections of things from the past, right? You know, these are all things we've been shaped into mentally projecting ourselves in a certain way. And we actually, we do ourselves, we dishonour ourselves and our tipuna, actually, by living into that, by breathing energy into that whole being. And I think presence, there is an issue that I have with these terms at the moment, mindfulness and presence and all of these things, because and I use them, but they feel so foreign. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And then the words themselves, because they're in the te reo Pākehā, they sound clinical to me. And one of the things that a little gripe that I have about the mental health profession in this country is they start co-opting Indigenous things into a clinical space. And it comes with a makariri-ness about the way those things are delivered. And, you know, I was reflecting the other day on, because I mean, I'm one, just being in our heads so much is probably the biggest addiction that this world has. Kia ora. Okay, next is alcohol, but the biggest addiction that we have is being in our minds, in our negative minds. And I was thinking, you know, there are all these practices we're having to implement and be active in being present and coming away from our minds and into our puku and just feeling and doing things. And for me personally, I find that an incredibly difficult thing to do, because the way I was conditioned. So I was brought up in a family that if you do not work 24/7, you have no value. And so this is working in terms of thinking and doing all of these things. So it takes a lot of active work for me and I have to swear at myself. I'm like, Kiri, what the fuck are you doing? Stop. Get the hell out of your mind and into your world, you know. And I have to do this all the time with myself, like once a day. And I get to a point where, okay, I need to be present. So I'm like making a cup of tea. And then I'm like, with the most mundane things in the world, I force myself to be present in just that moment and in that action. And sometimes in that moment, I have to force myself, like doing the washing, I'm like stirring my tea. And I look like an idiot, honestly, with some people that really don't sort of get where I'm going here. I just take my time, and just in that moment, I've given myself time and to breathe and to do all of these things. So I've really tried to incorporate presence in the mundane daily tasks, like doing my washing. I'll be, you know, folding all my washing, and I'm thinking about the mahi that I need to do in the next half an hour, and then I'm like, stop it. Focus on the towel. Come back. Focus on the towel, and then I'm like, oh, this towel's so, and I'm just feeling the towel, doing all of these things, and because your mind races off, and
100.
even with going for hikois and things like that, I'm just walking, I'm like looking at the trees, I'm just marveling at how beautiful everything is. Then a thought comes into my mind about what I need to do, and I'm literally going, Kiri, shut your mouth, get back into the present, look at the ground, look at the rocks, look at the stones. So I'm having this internal war with myself to bring my attention back to the present. And it's the hard thing about that, right? I'm thinking about our tipuna, and I'm like, man, they never ever would have had that terminology because they were so connected to their taiao and to everything that they were doing that it just was, and it is. So their mahi mara, like everything they did was just presence in the moment, and there's fruits of all of it, right down to. And this is what I love so much about being Māori, is that our expressions of oranga and our expressions of the deepest pain and everything like that is centred in our toi Māori. So all of that sits in moteatea, in our waiata, in our whakairo, and so all of the stories and our modes of expression of everything sits in the most beautiful pieces of art that presence would have, and you can see and feel the presence and all of that, and the consequence of that was well-being, but it wasn't like wasn't a different language, it was all the same thing. And I really envy that of our tipuna, and this is probably why toi Māori is so important. So our music, kapahaka, whakairo, raranga, all of these things, bringing those back to the fore, because there's just so much oranga in it, and it makes you be present. You know what I mean?
The gift, eh?
Yeah.
There's like so much gifts in the present moment, and I honestly resonate with you hard around the mundane things, because sometimes you don't even know you're thinking, and sometimes you just sort of like have to catch yourself and bring yourself to whatever is happening. And I always utilize, not that I use them in this way, but like my pepe is like a way to bring me into the present moment. And every time I'm present, he just makes me laugh, because I just see his little things that he's doing, or even going outside. I just always use the taiao as a space for me to get present as well, because there's so much chatter that happens within our minds, and it's just constant. So for me, it's about reminding myself to be as present as often as I can throughout the day. And sometimes it's 100 times. Sometimes it's less, because I forget to, so it's a constant practice. But the thing that I created within myself, it's a practice until it becomes a state. And the thing with the present moment is you don't judge yourself for overthinking. Because that's all dissipated. So the more you're present, the less you judge yourself, and the more you're connected to the gift, which is. And that's the thing that people may feel it's quite overwhelming if you're doing it all the time. But every time you're present, you're so grateful, because our natural state is of peace, of love, of joy. Whereas if we're not in our natural state and we're attached to our thoughts, that's where the anxiety comes in, that's when all of the overthinking comes in, that's when all of those other emotions that we're trying to not necessarily run away from, but would rather feel less.
Absolutely. And it's difficult because our babies are our best teachers for presence, because they just absolutely are, and we ruin them. Like the older, with having to no, come on, hurry up, we've got to get here, go to all these things. But it really is just an incredible journey, and the whole, even I think the whole bringing yourself back into it. Like I will intentionally, because we are always on autopilot, right? Like we sit there and we eat, but we're not eating.
No.
We're thinking about what we need to do.
Scrolling,
next.
watching TV.
Yeah. And the worst thing, like shower. I go and have a shower, and I say to myself before I jump in the shower, right, you're going to be present in the shower. And I self-talk all the time. And I'm in there and I'm like, okay, I'm feeling the water. feeling the water and all this stuff. And then next minute I know I'm thinking about a project that I'm going to come up with, and I'm like, what the hell? And I don't know how much time has gone past, but it just really says how... but I think, like, for me personally, what I find difficult is presence means slowing down.
Yeah.
And it also means, like, for what I struggle with is there are a lot of people expecting things from me. There are a lot of people expecting me to do this and this and this and this. Also because of the upbringing I have, where you need to be going 24/7, and actually work burnout is a valued thing in my upbringing, my story. And so often I'm really trying to be really aware of that stuff in the story that's creeping in, and having to do all of these things, because part of it also, while looking after myself, it's always for others, right? So, like, I'm a strong believer in ultimate joy comes from serving the bigger picture, and with that comes a responsibility to look after yourself and do all of that. And so there's also, as Māori, it becomes very difficult, because within that we have obligations. We have obligations to other people, other things, because that's who we are as whānau. So one of the things I really struggle with is the expectations, what I'm needing to do, what I'm obliged to do, plus also doing what I'm really passionate about, looking after my whānau, and then looking after me at the same time. And so that's the
dance
daily, the daily dance that I go through, and I don't always have it on lock. I go through a life. My life is up and down all the time. Like, I'll be experiencing a really toe, right? So I don't measure my life based on happiness or sadness or anything like that, because I think those big emotions are incredibly important. But when I'm feeling toe and content, that's when I know that things are okay. And I have my own measures of when the wheels are starting to fall off, what I'm not doing, what I am doing, and what I need to do to get back into that equilibrium state again. And it's often because I'm too much
expectation
falling into the expectations rather than what I know I need to do to be able to carry out that mahi properly.
I love all of that kōrero, and I really do resonate with the ultimate joy comes within surface, or contributing to something that is bigger than self. And that's what I not only does it come with fulfillment, but it comes with purpose, and I really, really enjoy, I guess, the story that you've shared with us, and the journey that you've gone through, and not only just your profession, but also just your ngākau, and how you still go through the challenges of better understanding yourself, and also looking at the bigger things, at what are those things teaching you about what it is that you're serving. Because that's what I've come to know, is that the more that I learn, the more that I grow, what I do grows and becomes better at the same time. So it is that whole journey around filling up your cup and using the overflow to serve. Because if we're at a space and we're so used to giving and not much room for receiving, it does get to a point where you start to break down. You start to, I guess, feel the challenges or the stresses of life start coming. And so having yourself, or having a space for self to receive, to go through the processes that you need to, so that you may grow. Because I just reflect on kaupapa that I'm in. The more that I grow, not only does the kaupapa grow, but the people within the kaupapa grow at the same time. And that comes with leadership. That's the responsibility, that's the obligation, those are those expectations that come with it. But every time I just connect to the present moment, it just feels like this is where I'm meant to be, because this is where I'm meant to be. But e hoa, one thing that I did want to, I guess, close us off for our final topic of this kaupapa is what comes down to when Māori are doing really good. And as you said, you've shared some awesome things about some awesome kaupapa, but this tall poppy syndrome, but there's just people just feeding at it and wanting to bring Māori down, and it comes into our own people. And there's some kōrero that I've been seeing online, Not me personally, but it's like observing things that are happening, and for me, it feels like it's a real thing. And do you have any kōrero on that, or any experiences, or what do you think that comes down to?
We talk a lot about individual trauma. So everyone has their own individual trauma, and I think what hasn't been acknowledged as such is a collective trauma that we have as Māori, and it's very, very thick, and it's very prevalent. Eckhart Tolle talks about, pain bodies and things like that, and we have, and actually a lot of Indigenous communities in the world that have been significantly oppressed by Western cultures have a massive, massive thick pain body, and I think that really impacts on us. But the whole tōpopi syndrome, I think, I understand absolutely that Pākehā or others will be a certain way towards Māori. My willingness to invest in changing that space is no longer there, because I think what needs to occur within ourselves is a collective healing first, because what we're seeing with our own people fighting amongst ourselves is there by design. So the whole purpose of colonisation is to divide and conquer, and that's exactly what we see within ourselves. So the disconnection from who we are, us being colonised and assimilated into a different way of being, has created a very different type of Māori. So we're all different. We're all different now, and that's okay. But I think underlying all of that is a real need for us to heal. We need justice before reconciliation can occur, from a Māori Pākehā perspective. But I really think I'm really invested now until the end of my days on supporting a collective healing for our people, because until that can happen, we are going to be at the expense of those who have designed for us to fight each other. There is no oranga in that, and I feel like we are on the brink of a turn for Te Iwi Māori. I can really feel there's a sense of there's this unapologeticness coming from our people. We're becoming really courageous and stepping out and doing all these things. I'm seeing really beautiful kaupapa coming out, like your kaupapa, everywhere where there are just attempts at investing and healing for our people. And I think the more we do that, the more we start to heal, the more we help each other create an awareness about what this tōpopi syndrome, pulling each other down, that is actually that is completely ego driven.
That's right.
And if we're focusing on the whole, the fact that we're responsible to one another, to lift one another up, we won't behave that way. But in order for us to do that, we need to start doing the work. Healing ourselves. And I think we can get there, and we've got pockets of our whānau everywhere doing it across the board, like our Māori music. It's just really beautiful. I can see that at the moment, and I really see in you, bro, and the likes of Bees, investing into our tāne Māori, and I think that's a massive, massive area that needs a lot of awhi at the moment, is in our tāne Māori. And I think, if we reflect, there's a and I said to you before, like I have a bit of a concern at the moment with the feminist movement co-opting our wahine Māori into mana wahine movement that I feel often comes at the expense of our tāne. And with a lot of women that I've spoken to, the genesis of all of that really comes from some trauma that they've experienced at the hands of Māori men. And I think that can often take away from what the purpose of mana wahine and mana tāne is. And for us as Māori, he ori te ngā mana. And I don't have to go around and say that I've got mana in order for me to have it, because I know that that is my divine right, but comes from my taha mana wahine, but also from my from my the male line of my generations, and in order for me to have mana, I require both tira tāne and both tira wahine to be able to do that. And I think that there's an element of us needing to get over ourselves in that space, and I think our tāne, and this is how I look at it, bro, like the whakapapa, I think the war had a really, really massive part to play in the way we're seeing our men at the moment and the way we're seeing our women, because we see that our Māori women are leading in so many areas. And if you look at the war, these are our Māori men that never knew what they were getting themselves into, that they were forced into a war to fight for something that had nothing to do with us. So they were sent away. And our women had to do everything. So you've got generations of women who had to learn how to do the front and the back, look after the kids, do the mara. So they took on both roles. And so that's why you see today, you're seeing such a strength in our wahine, and that's come from generations, that whakapapa of strength and resilience and having to do. Yeah, so that comes from all that strength of our wahine Māori. But what we're also seeing today is the product of what happened to our men in the war.
That's right.
So they went away as boys. They went and saw the most gruesome things in the whole wide world. They had to kill. They had to do all of these things. They had no hua for them. And they came back to nothing. In return. So they came back with what people would call today PTSD, having seen the most ugliest things. And they came back, and the only way they could deal with anything was through substances. And they went over there to be violent. So they're coming back, and they became violent. Not all of them, but there was no support for them. So if we really look at that whakapapa, are we surprised that that's what we see today? And to hiki that side, because te ira tāne me te ira wahine, ka puta ko te Māori. So we need our men to be at their best. And I think one of the biggest injustices I see at the moment is how terrible we are with our Māori men, and actually what they need. They need for us to do is to lean into aroha, to lean into compassion. Nobody wants to be violent. Nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to be a terrible person. And the other thing too is, all of the Māori men in my life are the most beautiful men in the world. They do hoha things, right? But there's also a narrative out there that's worse than what it really is. But I think my call is for us to come together in the name of aroha for the next generations, and that smashing the hell out of our men to be better is never going to work, and nor did it. And before they went away, they were the most beautiful nurturers in the world. And that's been documented right across, people coming in here. So I just have a real aroha at the moment, and I really digressed on that question, didn't I? But just around the collective trauma, and that we need to start taking responsibility for our contribution to the perpetuation of that trauma. And we are perpetuating it. We are definitely perpetuating it, and that's something that we can't blame on Pākehā. No. That's something we need to take responsibility for, and as we talk about breaking cycles in our families, by doing that, we're starting to break cycles for our people. And that's necessary, particularly in the way that we're looking after our men, our Māori men.
Wow. Yeah. Very, very much so resonate with a lot of their kōrero e hoa, and particularly at the collective healing that would just be so hugely beneficial for te ao Māori and for our people. And I think about something that was mentioned from a wahine over the weekend at the Whanau. Her name's Z, she's of African descent. And she said what we're doing in that wānanga is we're changing patterns for our future generations. And I think that's just so extremely purposeful, is that what we are doing now is changing the cycle of what we've come. And if you're in a space where you've got a lot of trauma and a lot of mamai, there is without sort of feeling, I guess this isn't direct and it's coming from a space of compassion and aroha, there is a responsibility and an obligation, particularly if there's aroha for your whānau and for your babies, is that for me as a papa, I take huge responsibility in the fact that whatever I need to work through, I'm going to work through so it doesn't go to my baby.
Yeah.
I want him to go through his own unique experiences, his own unique traumas that aren't because of what I wasn't willing to face or what I wasn't willing to go through. And that gives me a lot of drive to go into the uncomfortability, to go into the spaces that are quite challenging, because when it's for not only a better version of self, but because your babies get a better version of you, the people around you get a better version of you, it makes it a lot more inviting to step into that space. So mihi ana ki a koe mō kōrero tino a tāhua o kōrero tino reka. I know for sure that I've received so much and we bounce off each other so great e hoa, and it's been awesome to have this wānanga. But I want to hand it over to you, that if you have any final kōrero that you would like to share, I'm just going to pass it over to you.
Right, well, I just tuatahi mihi atu ana ki a koe, bro. Thank you for my therapy session today. This has been
I'll charge
awesome.
you on the way up there.
Not often people want to hear me talking like this for about an hour. Really appreciate the space, and just encouraging everybody out there to kaua e wehi, kaua e mataku, to healing. And you don't have to have trauma to heal. I think there is an ever-evolving process that never ends about being better and getting better. And for me, the more I learn, the less I know. and that's how deep the work is and the mahi is, in order for us to, the more we, it's healing our people one by one, the more that we can do that, and just encourage everybody to really invest in their whakapapa. And that's what that is by doing our own healing. We're investing so much in our whakapapa so that our mokopuna don't have to sort of endure things that we should have sorted for them. So for me, that's, making mokopuna decisions, doing everything that we can to ensure that they have a pathway to follow that is free from the obstacles we know that we can get rid of now.
Wow, mokopuna decisions. That is
mokopuna
on.
Decision.
Really, really love that. Tēnā koe, Kiri. Nau nei whārekihia o kōrero. Nau nei whārekihia o whakaaro, o karearoto. Tō nākau ki Wainganui. Ia maua o tirai tēnei kaupapa mo planting seeds. No mātou te honorini, no mātou te whiwhi. Mo tēnei koha. Mo tēnei moenei kōrero. So thank you so much for being here. I'm glad that we finally got to do it, for sharing space, and we probably could have went for another whole night. But I'm sure we'll be able to catch up again and further go into some more kōrero before what you have shared. I just want to say thank you so much.
Ngā mihi.
Ngā mihi. Kia ora tātou.